Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another one of these incredible conversations that I'm bringing to my YouTube channel to help us all just find out more about the complexities of the topics that we talk about on these channels. Now, today I have a guest called Emily Setty, and I noticed one of her posts on LinkedIn where she was speaking at a conference that looked super interesting. So I contacted her, and she has very kindly let us have a chat with her to find out more about her work and what she's found out in doing so. So, hi Emily, please could you just briefly introduce yourself and what you do?
Hi Jeremy and everyone. Thank you for having me. It's absolutely my pleasure to be here. I am a lecturer at university lecturer, and I do research typically with young people about issues connected to sex and relationships. You know, the challenges they're facing, what they're getting up to, and some of the problems I suppose that arise for them, and how best to kind of deal with that from a sort of educational, parenting, socialization perspective, really in a very brief nutshell. I'm sure we'll
Yeah,
talk more about
yeah,
it.
absolutely. So, how did you get into that work, by the way?
Yeah, so I started my PhD in 2014, and that was looking at, well, what we all called sexting at that time. So
Okay.
young people, I know no one uses the word sexting, not young people anyway. But yeah, it was looking at that in terms of young people sharing images and stuff with each other online, and the way in which that was all being criminalized and responded to in a very sort of punitive, abstinence-based sex ed kind of way. And yeah, so I started looking at young people's perspectives on that and their experiences, and then that sort of then just led me into more broadly looking at how they're developing and existing as young people in
Mm,
this current landscape. Yeah,
right.
when it comes to these sorts of
Which,
topics.
right, which I'm sure, I mean, for the adults looking at the younger generations, I feel like everybody's very fearful of what's going on and the power of the mobile phone and the cultures that it started, right? So I got my first mobile phone when I was 12 years old. No, it wasn't a smartphone then. It was just, text message. It wasn't even color, right? So it was like the very basic first mobile phone. And then I remember the phone started coming out, which you could take a picture, had a camera on it, and then you could start sending a picture. Now, so let's say by the time I'm 18 or 20 or 21, that kind of age, sending pictures or sharing pictures of yourself and receiving pictures of other people was quite the norm. You at that age, you're not thinking about the consequences of it. You're definitely not thinking about the law, or the rules, or what implications it could have of sending a nude picture of yourself. So it's just like culture. Now,
Mm.
very interestingly, last year I was working for a charity, local charity to me. I was doing some part-time work for them on social media, and I wanted to open the conversation around sharing nudes. And they weren't allowed to actually speak about that because they said we can't talk to our target audience, which is under 18s. We can't talk to them about sharing nudes because sharing nudes is against the law if you're under
Mm.
18s. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, yeah. So it's that any imagery of an under 18 cannot be captured and stored and distributed, right? So like if you're, say, a 16-year-old taking a picture of yourself, well, you're producing an illicit image of a child. If you're a 25-year-old receiving that image and sharing it around, then you're breaking the law because it's an
Wow.
illicit image of a child. So it's whoever's in that image. You also can't send imagery to under 18s because that's around, the law around exposing young people to sexually explicit imagery and grooming and all of that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's perfectly the case that, I don't know, yeah, a couple of 15-year-olds, as you say, totally normalized flirting in the digital age. It's
Right.
it's what kids want to do, right? But that would technically be against the law, not because there's a specific law against young people sharing nudes. It's because of the old sort of what we call child pornography stuff,
Mm.
right? For as problematic as that terminology is,
Mm.
but that's the law that's sort of capturing this problem, as it were. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I mean, but no one under the age of 18 is taking notice of those rules.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because when I first started researching this, there was not a great deal of knowledge about that. And because of the differences with age of consent rights, you have these kids being like, but you can have sex at 16, but you can't take a picture until you're 18 and blah, blah. So there was a lot of sort of lack of knowledge about that. Now, there are lots of cautionary tales that float around the peer group. You know, all young people know, oh, that boy who got cautioned by the police and this and that. So there are stories coming out, and that awareness is starting to rise. The problem with that is that, like anything, when you tell young people they're not allowed to do something, you don't stop the behavior, you just push it underground, and
Yeah.
kids get better at getting away with it. And I've had exactly the same conversations that you've had, where by professionals think, well, we can't educate or have any other different conversation, we have to just say don't do it, it's illegal. And I completely get the pressures that they feel around that. But yeah, then it just means we've got a complete disconnect between
Right.
what people are really getting up to and what we're able to support them with. So,
Okay. And I completely agree. We just end up pushing it underground, right? And they'll
mm,
just do what they want mostly, largely anyway, when it comes
yeah.
to, in particular when it comes to technology, because they're so much better than us at it. So
Yeah, and to them, it's not a offline online thing. If there's a contradiction between what, you know, if we're, say, giving them safe sex RSE, you know, relationships and sex education, that's about, okay, here's your contraceptive options, here's this, here's that, but then whenever anything's digital, it's no, don't do it. And that juxtaposition of, okay, you know, sex and relationships can be this positive healthy thing, but not if it's online, like don't do anything online. And that to a young person just completely doesn't mean anything, that distinction. There is also a more sort of nefarious sort of influence on this stuff about really emphasizing sort of the law and punishment around some of the unethical behaviors that go on. Because, say, like groups of boys that I speak to in particular, they will say things like to me around, oh yeah, like you can't have a nude of a girl on your phone anymore, like you can get done for having child porn and that, and they all get really like wound up about it. And they go, so I say, oh, what do? Do you like not engage in any of these behaviors anymore then? And they're like, oh no, like if your mate's got a picture, like you definitely, he won't text it to you, he'll just show it to you on the phone, because if he texts it to you, there's then the digital trail and we all get in trouble. So they've listened to this idea they can get punished, and their unethical behavior of privacy and consent and all of that is still really bad, but they're learning how to stay out of trouble.
Right.
So it's not having a good impact, this legal kind of education that we're delivering on this at all.
Okay, and how is the conversation with young boys around these topics? I mean, my goodness, it must be interesting at the least.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I love talking to teenage boys. I remember when I first started researching all this, they'd be like, you know, say if I go into a school, whatever, and they'd be like, oh, the teenage boys, they won't talk to you. You know what boys are like. They just clam up and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. When you let teenage boys rip, you can't even get a word in. They love it, you know? And there's a lot of sort of banter and like
Yeah.
masculine bravado type stuff that goes on in the group. But even just sort of letting that unfold, you can really start pinpointing some of their more like complex feelings that they've got and like the pressures that they experience. There's a lot of performativity among teenage boys, and peer pressure and all of that. And that probably masks a lot of more complex outlooks, I think,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So can we just have a talk about how the life of a young boy slash young man would have been pre-internet compared to now? Obviously that's a massive question, but what I'm trying to say is, can you talk to us a little bit about the influences that the connection of the internet has brought us in all its ways on sex and the impressions it has on young boys?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you tell me, what was it like when you just had your brick
Oh
phone?
my, well, you know, it just, me and my friends laugh about it sometimes. We're like, oh my goodness, when we started getting like really interested in girls, you had the odd magazine that was floating around from someone who nicked it from their parents,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Or somebody had a videotape that was being handed around, and that was like gold dust. Like we're talking like we're 14, right? Then the
Mhm.
internet comes, and then all of a sudden you've got it on tap. So
Mhm.
this is where I find it, scary definitely actually is the right word to use. I was just about to use it, fascinating, but actually it's scary, because I feel like if you are a young 14-year-old boy, you starting developing, your hormones are through the roof. And you've got this phone that is going to deliver everything you want, plus more things that you would have never imagined, all accessible to you constantly. I mean, I can only think that's a bad thing for your brain.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, isn't it? I think it goes back to sort of what we were saying at the start about like how some of the constraints within which the adults in the room, as it were, are talking to kids about these topics, because it's not the way we're sort of approaching it is as adults, you know, is not necessarily giving kids the tools that they need to navigate that really complex reality. Because yeah, you're absolutely right that I suppose on one side of it, the intensity of the hormones, the absolute sort of terror but excitement about even the idea of being in the company of someone you fancy. I mean, those feelings like
Yeah.
that's there, right? Like it's
Yeah.
always been there. Like I'm similar sort of age. I think to you with how you're saying when you got a mobile phone and stuff.
Yeah.
Absolutely remember it. And I remember things like we got, you know, like MSN Messenger and all of
Yeah.
that started going off at secondary school for me. And you'd have all your little rituals like, oh, you know, you log in and log off so that the little notification comes up and the guy
Yeah.
you fancy might notice that you've come up and all of this nonsense. So all of that's always been there, that really like that adolescent like intensity of all of that stuff. But yeah, I think you're right that what the internet brings, and particularly like the internet in your pocket, like when I was younger, it was you had 30 minutes a day. I had to swap it over with my brother. If my
Right.
mum wanted to phone somebody, I'd have to get off.
Yeah.
You know, all of that. Now it's 24/7, is it right there? And yeah, I mean, like the boys that I speak to, like pornography, say, which I guess is the real like thing, isn't it, that everyone's sort of worried about and what that's doing. And yeah, that absolutely is there. And yeah, you know, Pornhub and all of that, those spaces that we all kind of know about and freak out about, but also on a more sort of mundane level, like it just being there on social media, just this constant sort of barrage of highly edited, highly idealized depictions of bodies, of relationships, of all of this. Boys as well getting sent, because it's interesting that you say like there's the things you want and then there's all of the rest of it. And yeah, boys talk a lot about being sent stuff, you know, constantly getting sent links and they don't know and they click on it and it's like this porn thing or whatever, and they get added to groups and then it's all on there and there's a lot going on. But I think what's tricky for boys is like, how do they find their space within all of that? Because the narrative is that, well, you're a teenage boy. Of course you want to watch porn. That's like, you're masculine, you're this, you're that. And, you know, a lot of boys actually that I sit down and speak to feel very conflicted actually,
Oh.
and experience a lot of ambivalence. And this idea that something might be really exciting and enticing, but then half an hour later you actually feel a bit gross
Right.
about what you just watched. Like, but when you're watching it, you're sort of sucked in and sucked
Right.
in. And I try and talk to them about things around like the editing of porn and just the nature of the industry. I mean, like you're talking multi-billion-dollar industry that knows exactly how to get your attention and draw you in. But to these boys, all their understanding is, oh, maybe there's something wrong with me. And it's like, are we not actually equipping them with any sort of critical awareness of how the industry operates? Like we talk, it's all about shame. It's about you can get addicted. You're developing in this maladaptive way, rather than being like, no, the way you're reacting to porn is exactly how a human being would react to this stuff, right? It's designed to suck you in and make you kind of want more and more and like all of that kind of thing. And boys do it around performance. Like I was saying at the start, there's so much performativity in male peer groups and like watching porn with each other and sharing stuff around. There's a lot of social capital within male peer groups to be gained through doing that kind of stuff. So boys are like, they're trying to figure themselves out as individuals within sort of like a corporate landscape that's totally exploitative, within like a peer group landscape that's all really full of pressure and expectation. And like, where does the individual get left within all of that?
Wow.
And then the teacher turns up and goes, oh, it's all illegal. You know, you could get addicted. And, you know, if you watch porn, you might not get aroused in real life. And you think, oh, is this really that helpful? I don't know.
Okay. So that's really, really interesting what you're saying. So maybe the discussion around porn is incorrect. that we're having. Maybe it's not. It's like, maybe it's almost like the drug conversation 20 years ago. Don't touch it, you'll get addicted. Anyone that's involved in it is going to bring you down. Watch everything you do around. It's like, maybe that's not the correct conversation around porn, which actually is I've written the odd post here saying, like, how dangerous is porn? How addictive is porn? Is porn out to get you? Is porn driving your desires that aren't actually there before you watched it? Is it creating your desires? Is this maybe that's the wrong conversation? Maybe we just have a conversation about porn for what it is. It's an entertainment industry. They want to sell you stuff. They want to advertise stuff. They're trying to make content that's absolutely gripping, that makes you want to watch it again, and we can just let the young people know that that's what it is. It's not reality.
Yeah. And I think there's a couple of really really key things there to think about with what you've just said. Like, the first point about like desire, is it sort of constructing desire? Is it all of this? And actually, then you could almost really step back from that and say, well, where do our desires even come from?
Right.
Like, how do we figure out what we desire, what turns us on, what doesn't? Actually, there's loads of different sources of influence over that one, right? Is there like a genuine desire? Does that really exist? Or are we kind of piecing it together from a whole bunch of expectations and messages? And like, what role does porn play within that? And this idea about it, not being real and not, being a sort of like fantasy and entertainment. And we can sort of critically deconstruct what is depicted as a fantasy. Absolutely. And I've spoken to boys about that. They're like, is it right though, that sort of like really rough, almost like a sexual assault, really, some of it is being depicted as fantasy? Like, what does that mean? And you can have really interesting conversations with kids about that. But, I think, we don't, what's the woman, she said it ages ago, she said, we don't worry that kids are going to watch Fast and the Furious and then go out and drive like maniacs, because we give them driving lessons and they know it's not real.
Right.
Almost because we're not educating properly.
Wow.
We give porn too much power. Because
Wow.
in fairness, boys they call me out on this. They go, all right then, if porn's not real, then what is? Like, because the question I often get from boys is like, young boys, 13, 14-year-olds, they're like, do girls actually find like XYZ pleasurable that we've seen? And I'm like, no, probably not. Maybe some of them do, but don't take it as a given that they do, because no, porn is depicting something that is often quite painful or whatever, even if the girl's sort of acting like she likes it. So definitely don't take anything as a given. And these boys, then they turn around and say things like, but no one talks to us about what girls find pleasurable. We don't get any sort of like educational guidance on this. They go, if the girl's going nuts on a porn film, then all we've got to go on is, she looks like she's having fun. Everyone's telling us what's not real. Everyone's telling us what's fake, what's just meant to be entertainment, but no one's telling us what is.
Wow.
And I was like, that's the problem, isn't it? We're giving too much power to porn, and it's because we don't want to have the opposite conversation, right? It's a lot easier to say porn's addictive than it is to say, oh, okay, like, this is what sex is like. This is how bodies might react and how things might feel, because that's way more awkward.
You know what? After, it's like the problems with us adults, isn't it?
Definitely, yeah.
Like, it's our fear of the subject of sex. It's like we behave like the children.
Well, do you know what? It's funny, isn't it? Because we say all this stuff, don't we? Worry so much what kids doing on their phones, what they're doing at XYZ. Like, adults are not getting sex and relationships right. I mean, look at what the surveys show you, like the percentage of married couples that don't have sex with each other, all these issues that go on in relationships into adulthood. Like, this very notion that like you can sit down as this objective person with all this knowledge and this ability to guide the youth of today into this healthy adult sexual experience or whatever. No, because we're all getting it wrong all the time, aren't we? And so I think we're almost need to reconceptualize what we even have to offer young people and what this is actually meant to be about, right?
Wow. So for all the parents that are listening to this, that's quite a large chunk of my audience, and they're worried about their son who's growing into a young man and how much porn he may be or maybe not watching, or their sex life or anything to do with sex in general. You got any advice for them?
Yeah, do you know, I always preface, I'm asked this question all the time, and I always preface with like, I don't have my own children, so
Okay.
I wouldn't dream of giving parenting advice out when you know what I mean, in terms of people are like, well, lucky old you, like you don't have.
Right.
I've done work with parents, I've done some research with parents where they're like, you're literally like, you're trying to get dinner on the table, you're trying to go to work, and like now you've got to have these amazing conversations like at the drop of a hat, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, you know, I don't know that life, so any advice I give, definitely I know my privilege, as it were, in
Yes.
that sense. However, that being said, I think the couple of things I tend to say is like, look, as parents, like, first, take the pressure off of yourself. Like, kids do not want, whether it's a parent, a teacher, or whoever, to be able to solve all this for them and to be like the perfect human being with all of this. They know that actually the conversations they appreciate having the most is those ones of like, oh, it is actually a bit messy and complicated, isn't it, actually? And we all struggle with this, and we all don't really know like how we feel and what's right and wrong or whatever. They want that two-way conversation. And actually, leaving the conversation thinking, oh, do you know what, actually I'm even a bit less unsure, you know, I'm more unsure about this than I was when I went in. That's not actually a problem. Like, you're just raising that ability to self-reflect and critical kind of consciousness around stuff. And what I tend to do, say with boys around that, I say, look, if you're confused, maybe if you're heterosexual, you know, or not, like whoever your partner is, maybe so is your partner. So if you're confused by what a girl or another boy might be doing, well, maybe think they probably might be feeling like you. So actually, can we start showing empathy for each other and whatever? So I don't think we should be frightened of conversations where there is no easy answer and we don't all really know how we think and feel. I think as parents, it's two roles that you play, really, isn't it, in anything with parenting, but I think including in this field. One, you're socializing a set of values, right? You know, porn will change, what's going on in the world will change and develop, but what you are trying to impart to your child is a set of values and a way of treating people, and like that underpinning everything, right? And like you can role model that and argue for that in the way that you speak, you know. And I think creating open lines of dialogue. You're never going to solve everything, as we've spoke about at the beginning. Kids you can tell them something's dangerous, you can say whatever, they're probably going to go off and experiment. Have you created an open line of dialogue? You might not have been able to figure out anything for them on that one day, but they know, oh yeah, mom, dad, there's someone who I can kind of chat with if it all goes wrong, you know. And so I think it's about looking at, what's your goal of the conversation? I know some parents I speak to, they're like, how do I stop my son watching porn? And I'm like, I don't know actually how you'd stop anybody from watching porn. I mean, you can lock them in their room and don't give them any devices and don't let them spend any time with anyone else that has any devices. I mean, maybe then that'll work, but you're probably going to be damaging them even more than like, you know what, you know, it's how do we strengthen the ability to have resilience in the world as it is? And that is, you know, it's ongoing conversations, isn't it?
Okay, brilliant. And I take a lot away from that, in particular when I present to teenagers and I have the Q&A session, which is the second half of my presentation. And yeah, I'm always trying to find the best ways to interact with those 15-year-olds, those 16-year-olds on these topics. And what I took away from what you're saying is just talk to them on a level, not like you're up here and they're down here and you've got it all solved, because as you very rightly said, we ain't got anything solved for ourselves. So why are we, you know, yes, we want to give advice and give our life experience, but I think we jump to, me included, jump to talking to young people like we've got the solution, we've got it solved, we're doing it ourselves, listen to me. And that doesn't work. Like when I was 15, that didn't work when adults used to speak to me like that. So I take a lot away from
it's very alienating. And kids as well, like something that like I finished a project recently on like how young people felt affected by lockdown in their relationships, and something that came out quite strong was like they actually really want to go through a learning process. They don't want to be told at 15, oh yeah, this is what you've got to think and feel, like take all my wisdom as the older adult. They want to go through a journey themselves. They want to have different experiences. They want to see stuff going on, and they want to figure out for themselves what they think and feel. And they don't want an answer yet. They know at 15 a bunch of stuff is going to carry on happening to them, and they want to be able to go through that, but they want to go through it in a way where they can kind of figure out, right, like when's something getting really dodgy, like where can I go for help, like what do I do if I'm feeling a bit confused, you know. They but they want their own life. They want to build their own wisdom,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
And we know, don't we? Like, well, I'm 36. Okay. So like my mum, when she was 36, yeah, there's stuff that we now can talk about in a different way, but I'm definitely a different 36-year-old than who she was. I had to go through my journey, right? Like she went through hers. And I think it's about trying to equip people to do that in a safe and healthy way and respectful for other people. You know, often with kids, we talk to them about like, don't get into trouble yourself, don't, you know, worry about your own self. But actually it's like, well, how do we treat other people? You know, what does it mean to go through that journey in a way that's respectful to others and all the rest of it? I also would say on that though, it doesn't mean we can never like put in our 2 pence worth. You know, what I tend to do, like say, yeah, you sit down with all these kids, you know, they're talking about how they feel and it's all bouncing around and all of that, and you listen and you sort of ask questions, take an interest. And then what I sort of try and do at the end is go, all right, like I've heard a lot that you've all said, like a few things are, you know, standing out to me, and I sort of summarize it and I go, do you want to know like what I think about some of what you've said? And I say it in a bit of a jokey way, and then like, all right then, yeah, tell us. And I'm like, well, I'm getting that you're sort of struggling with this, so I understand why you might be doing XYZ, say, but you know what, I think you might want to think about that a bit differently. Like maybe actually that isn't really the solution to your problems or whatever. So you can start, you can feed it in, you can still say what you think, but you've done it in that sort of, it sounds a bit cringy, but like active listening style. You know, you've given them the floor, you've validated them, and then you can go, let me do my adult bit and tell you what I think. You know, because kids then are receptive to it. It's like anyone. Like I want advice from people sometimes, but you don't want it, you know, in the first 30 seconds before you've even really got out what you think, right?
And lectured to you.
Yeah, exactly. Who wants that? And it's like we say, don't we? We go, oh, my teenager won't talk to me about porn or sex or whatever. And it's like, yeah, because who would? Like, if someone came up to you and go, tell me about your porn habits, I'd be like, no. I'd be like, going back to that thing in relationships, like, it's hard enough talking to my own husband about sex and intimacy, right? Like I don't really want to be talking about it with anyone else, right? It is difficult. Kids aren't weird for clamming up in these conversations.
Yeah.
Like, it's totally understandable.
It's almost like you want to start the conversation with them saying like, trust me, I find this as equally as awkward as you do. Just to let them know you are on their level. You aren't some kind of master at this at all.
Exactly.
So you speak to young people a lot?
Yeah.
In schools or?
Yeah, schools, youth clubs, you know, anywhere really that you'll find them. Yeah.
How have you arrived at this? Like, is this part of your job or this is part of your interest, or can you tell us a bit more about that?
So sort of as a lecturer at university, I not to kind of bore you about university contracts or anything, but yeah, very fascinating stuff. You can do, obviously there's teaching as part of your role, but you are meant to have your own sort of research profile. So I'm a lecturer in criminology, and I do like, so my research focuses on obviously all the stuff to do with sex and relationships among young people, but like where it crosses into sort of things that might become harmful or abusive or whatever, and how we should attempt to deal with that. So as well as teaching about things, I'll also go out and do my own research, and that's where it's all basically sitting down and talking to kids. It's funny, really. You think it's not what you think, is it, when you think of like research in a university? But it honestly is.
But that's where the research is, isn't it? With the young people that what you're researching is happening to.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, that's where I'm always a bit mindful. You know, I have got all my views as I've just sort of outlined them all here, but I do have a great deal of sympathy with parents, teachers, youth workers, all these people, because when you're a researcher, you can go in and have these sort of off the record conversations that can be quite candid and all the rest of it, because it's all in the service of generating knowledge and all of this kind of stuff. And there are, you know, ethical spaces in which you can talk about things that are potentially illegal and all of that, because you have to justify it in the sense that, you know, talking to people about things that are potentially legal is important, because we've got to understand what's going on for them. So as a researcher, you do have quite a bit of freedom, but obviously, yeah, teachers, youth workers and all the rest of it have got a completely different relationship and set of stipulations. I mean, youth workers seem to have a little bit more kind of flexibility in the sort of youth work tradition. I mean, teachers, bless them, I don't know how they do it really, trying to deal with all this stuff in schools. I have a great deal of sympathy for what they're trying to achieve, right? It is hard.
And I always like to shout out teachers, because I don't think we give them enough credit for the job that they do. It must be so tough delivering these syllabuses,
No.
and you can't break away from the straight and narrow. You've got all of these rules. Like, yeah, it must be incredibly difficult. Could you talk a little bit? You mentioned a
And
bit
it's not
about,
like they've got the time and the resources, right?
right, right,
Yeah, no,
and
sorry, you carry on. Yeah.
they're jam packed. I think we got a slight delay because we got a touch of a connection problem, but we'll keep rolling, right?
Yeah.
I think it's my side, but it should
Okay, no, you're sounding okay to me now.
should
Yeah.
rejig itself. Um,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so you mentioned about harmful sexual behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Are you doing some work around that? Is that with the younger boys?
Yeah. So doing a whole bunch of stuff on that. I've been working with the Department for Education recently about, the whole post, everyone's invited, all this stuff around this problem within schools of harmful sexual behavior between young people, whether it be sort of like that routine sexual harassment type catcalling in the corridors, up all the way up to really sort of serious non-consensual stuff that goes on between kids. And yeah, so working a bit with the Department for Education to figure, to help them with how they're sort of the policy and practice they're putting out for schools on this, but also doing some stuff with young people about, okay, like, what is it that you see as the problem, and how can we actually deal with this in an effective way? Because God, I mean, just the systems and cultures within schools and all the rest of it, it's so complex what actually sits underneath some of these behaviors and what needs to be resolved. So
Okay.
yeah, that's all still ongoing. Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
this is a massive area of interest for me when it comes to the discussion around harmful sexual behaviors, and how we're talking to young people about crimes of a sexual nature, and who's doing them, why they're doing them, what to do if you feel tempted to carry out a crime of this nature, what to do if you have committed a crime of this nature, what to do if a crime of this nature has been committed on you, this whole type of discussion, because I always feel like it's the general society are like, oh, that kind of thing doesn't happen around here, or my son would never do something like that, or my daughter, that would not happen to my daughter, she is aware, or she knows the dangerous situations, like all of that kind of outdated view. Can you speak to us a little bit about how the young people, is it boys predominantly that you speak to, or you
Boys
speak to
and
girls?
girls, yeah, I
Oh,
do speak
okay.
to both sides. Yeah.
Okay, and
And everything in between and all that. Yeah.
so can
Yeah.
you tell us how they are talking about harmful sexual behaviors, or how that conversation goes?
Yeah, sure. And I think it's really interesting around, and I've absolutely come across the same thing, a very kind of individualized way of looking at this, like, oh, individually, my child or this child is either high or low risk for this or whatever. And it's all kind of attributed to that individual. When really, like, what I'm really trying to push for, along with others that I'm doing work in this area with, is really looking at this as a cultural problem. So that normalized patterns of behavior, because I think it's really interesting what you say about sort of recognizing like your propensity to do something, or what you would do if something happened to you and all the rest of it. Well, so much of this is so deeply ingrained and normalized within like peer culture and arguably adult culture as well. This idea of girls talking about non-consensual sexual behaviors all across the continuum of the acts themselves, as just being just part and parcel of life. Yeah, of course you get harassed, of course you get touched when you don't want to be, of course sometimes you agree to have sex when you don't want to. That's just what life is like. And things are so deeply normalized, and the sort of axes of blame and responsibility, and even recognizing that something abusive has happened, is so deeply rooted, and it's affecting how all young people are developing in terms of their expectations of sex and relationships. So yeah, I speak to, like, thinking of the teenage boys, most teenage boys that I speak to will, on the face of it, say, this is not something I'd want to do to a girl. I want to have nice, happy, relationships and all the rest of it. They're not going out wanting to attack girls, whatever.
Mm.
But they're saying that they just don't really know whether they're coming or going. They don't know how to figure out how girls feel. They don't know how to negotiate consent. They don't know how to deal with the pressures they experience in their own peer group to have sex, and even when they don't want to, because they were, both boys and girls will speak to me in quite a nuanced way that very easily two people could be in a bedroom together and have sex, but neither of them really actually wanted to. They're both feeling pressures and expectations, right? And so there's something very cultural happening there. And I think it goes beyond like, oh yeah, my child wouldn't do that. Yeah, maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't, but actually there's a bigger conversation to be had here about how young people are relating to each other and what their expectations are. And I think on the side then of what people then do when something happens, that's a very cultural thing as well. I mean, girls will say repeatedly to me, every single group of girls, I swear, that I've sat down with will say to me, yeah, boys do stuff and we don't really like it, but we wouldn't report it, and or even call it out. And I'm like, oh, why, if you know it's wrong? And they go, oh god, because then you just look uptight, and that boy, all his mates will be like, oh, why have you got my mate in trouble? And then none of the guys will like you, and blah blah blah. And so they know it's wrong, but they don't feel that they can do anything about it. So again, that's a cultural thing, right? And so there's a lot of displays of resilience, and oh yeah, I just ignore it and I just move on. Some of the image-based sexual abuse, being sent unwanted like dick pics and all of that, very prevalent for teenage girls. And they're like, oh yeah, you just delete it and you just forget about it. And I'm not really massively convinced at those kind of responses. So we might say, oh, someone's really resilient, but at what cost? There's a lot of normalized abuse going on that I think we need to really challenge and identify, right?
Yeah. So I was in a coffee shop a few months ago, and I was waiting for a meeting, and there was a couple of girls who were sitting in a table next to me. They were very young. They looked, I don't know, maybe 17 or 18. And a man approached them who definitely wasn't with them and said something to them. And it all looked a bit shady. He walked away, and I was so curious what that was about. And I said to the two girls, I said, sorry to interrupt you. Did you know that guy? And they said no. I said, oh, what did he want? And they said, he's a scouter for models for H&M. Right?
Sure he is.
I'm sure he is. Right. And so I said, oh, that's a bit weird. And they were like, oh yeah, we know he's not actually. He approached us at the station as well. So I was like, oh, okay. So I then went on to say to them, oh my goodness, like your lives as young girls in real life and online must be so crazy, that the experience that you're having. And they said, yeah. Then we talked about online. They were like, we get messages every day. We get DMs every day through Instagram, right? Yeah. Older men or fake profiles. Yeah. And then very interestingly, what you said at the very start of this conversation about young boys being targeted with adverts, porn adverts, hot model adverts, because I've received those on Instagram before, where it's a link to something, you press the link and it takes you to something completely different. So it's not just the girls that are having a bad experience, boys are having a bad experience. It seems to always be connected to sex in some way, or sexual desire in some way. And I'm just learning so much from you, because it's like, well, who's having the actual real conversations with these young people? To say, look, we understand that that is a shitty time for you. Like, we understand that is not very nice. Being sent dick pics, unwanted dick pics, cannot be a great experience.
No. And it's influencing, like we were sort of saying about the boys earlier, like how are they figuring themselves out within all of these competing landscapes? And I think exactly what you're sort of saying about the girls, because the story you've heard, this expectation almost of being objectified and sexualized by older guys, often online and offline. And what does that do when you, as a girl, young woman, is trying to figure out your changing body, your feelings, and and all of this? Like, where do you sit within the middle of all of that? And I think sometimes there is still sort of shame and stigma that circulates around women's bodies and sexuality. You know, girls are very conscious of being slut shamed and like they're of being policed for what they wear, you know, and school uniform policies and all of this kind of stuff. And there's a lot of resentment that they feel that they are being held responsible for often the harassing behaviors of grown men. You know, they really but I'm shocked at the number of times I have heard from girls that they are told by teachers in school, don't roll your skirts up, it's distracting to the boys and the male teachers. You know, so uniform policy is not just being implemented in that way, but in that language of real victim blaming and really inappropriate comments about teenage girls. And you think, well, why are they being held responsible for this? So it's part of a real pattern of experience, I think, across adolescence for girls. And you know, in their peer group, like I say, lots of slut shaming, lots of stigma, lots of policing around sort of, yeah, you want a boyfriend and boys want you to have sex, but then if you have sex, then maybe they'll reject you and all this. So they're navigating all of this stuff, right? And I think, yeah, where are we sitting down going, okay, how does it feel to have to deal with all of that? Like, what's that actually like? And this binary idea of like risk and vulnerability and the good and the bad girls and all of this, I think really simplifies how complex the feelings are around this, right? Because yeah, you know, parents, teachers, they might, oh, not these girls or whatever, but they just by occupying public space, they are going to have these experiences, right? It doesn't matter how level-headed they are, what a good head on their shoulders they got. None of that matters. Just existing is enough to be affected, right?
It's so. Yeah, this whole thing for me, I start to feel frustrated that young people go through that. I know now when you talk about it and I look back at me at 15 or 17, it's like I was going through that as well, internet or no internet. Like it's like the whole confusion or trying to find yourself or trying to understand the complexities of sex is as you're growing up is huge. Can I ask, like, what are the aims of your work moving forward, and like what is it that you would like to achieve, or what direction are you trying to push things in?
Yeah, I mean, what I try to think about, and what I like with each bit of sort of work I do, is like, how can we encourage a direction towards ethical and positive sexual cultures and relationships with each other? So often, like, we think that the solution, say, to like what we're seeing in school, harmful sexual behavior, you know, oh, we go in and we educate boys about consent and we tell people about the law and we do this and that. And I absolutely agree that there is a need to raise awareness around what the laws of this country tell you about your rights and your responsibilities. Like, that's such an important part of being a citizen. But if we think, say, about like sexual citizenship, like, what does it really mean to be a sexual citizen? Like, what does it mean to interact sort of positively and ethically, like with ourselves, with each other? And like, how can we move those relations between us all into a more sort of positive space? I mean, sex positivity, I know it's like an overused expression and it's got its issues, but you know, I think it's really sad actually when, say, like when heterosexual teenagers particularly do see the opposite sex as almost not the enemy, but definitely a source of risk. Like, boys will say, girls, you know, consent, I could get arrested, there could be a false accusation of rape, my life could be ruined by girls. Girls, on the other hand, are like, oh yeah, of course boys don't really care about you and are going to exploit you and are going to do X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, that is so sad, actually, that's what we're sort of, for, you know, intentionally otherwise. And what I'm really interested in understanding is like, how can we create a culture, how can we create relationships between people where you don't see each other in terms of risk and harm? And that, because I said to a girl, I remember asking a girl the other day about how to sort of, because she wasn't sure what she wanted out of something or whatever, and I said, oh, would you talk to your boyfriend about what you want and like your confusions and stuff? And she was like, oh my god, no, I wouldn't talk to him about it. And I was like, oh, who would you talk to? And she's like, oh, maybe my mates or something. And I was like, wow, like, if your interpersonal relationships, like your intimate relationships, are not being experienced as a place of trust and safety and openness, how can we get you to that point? Because if we do change relationships in that direction, if that's what we're saying, then the grounds for exploiting people like disappear, don't they? Because you wouldn't want to do that to someone you genuinely love and care for. Look, you know, the boys talking about consent, they say they don't want to get arrested. And I'm like, okay, but like, what about violating somebody? Like, where does that factor in? But is it
Right.
just what you can get away with? And the
Right.
problem with our messaging is that it is getting a little bit, well, what can I get away with? I get kids up, like boys will say to me, like, what am I allowed to do? Like, when will I get in trouble?
Huh.
And I'm like, God, is that how we want to approach sex? Like, what can we get away with? And like, I don't know, it's very disturbing to me. So yeah, with all my work, I'm like, what are the conditions for delivering sort of education or messaging in a different sort of way?
Okay. So when we've got young teenage boys and their concern is, what can I do that doesn't get me in trouble? Or like you say, what can I do? What can I do that's okay? What can I do that's within the rules? It's not that the person who they're actually having sex with is not in that in those sentences. The well-being or the pleasure or the care or support for the person who they're having sex with is not in that in their primary concern. Their primary concern is, what can I do that I find exciting that's within the rules? What will I get and what will I do that I could get arrested for? It's like you've got two individual people having sex with each other, worried about what they can and can't do to each other, instead of just taking care of the other person,
each other, and finding yourself through that relationship. Like, absolutely, that's entirely what they're doing. Because it's like I've spoken to boys about like this false accusation thing, and like they'll say things like, oh well, sometimes girls change their mind, like they say they agreed something and then they don't find it very pleasant, and then they say, oh actually I didn't really want that. And I'm like, oh okay, like fine, like obviously no one wants to get arrested. Like in an ideal way, like you'd be able to sort of negotiate, like navigate that with each other, like we all try out things and like things or not or whatever. And I said, like, what would you like that situation to be like in an ideal world? And they're like, oh well, the thing is, like, if the girl agreed to it and then she didn't like it, well that's her problem, isn't it? Like that's not my fault. And I'm like, oh god, you're really stuck in this blame and fault and responsibility game. Exactly, like not care and like, oh, how do we deal with that situation? It's not that one of you's a perpetrator. It's just, that was a situation that you might need to sort of figure out together, like how that both made you feel. But because we've made these interactions so fraught, we've probably quite well-meaning, but we've said, look, things can go wrong, the law says this, blah blah blah. We've almost like terrified these kids a little bit as to where it can go, and we've closed down that more like loving, mutual, supportive thing, and how they can get that from their relationship with each other, like consent and being confused about how you feel and experiences of pressure. How actually can your relationship be a way of like working some of that out and being honest about how you feel and all of that, right? Like you can't be a mind reader. You don't always know what you both think and feel, but like talk to each other about it.
So the initial response that we started with, that seems like the whole thing of like, what can I do that I won't get in trouble for? That's almost like a fear response. It feels like a fear response to the rules and what people may say and what you could be accused of, or okay, it's just so interesting. I just want to make so much content around these things. I feel like there's not enough good examples for young teenagers growing up, and I wonder what you think the role of film, music is playing in all of this, like the entertainment industry that is heavily sexualized, lyrics in songs, film scenes, etc.
I mean, all of that in a way is putting up another sort of impression of how things should be, shouldn't they? Because if you think about like the law and rules, even thinking about that in terms of relationships, yes, we do need a legal structure there, but the law cannot arbitrate over all forms of sexual interaction and intimacy, right? It's just not going to ever capture the nuances of humanity, right? When it comes to relationships, it's there as a sort of, when something goes wrong in a certain way that needs to be dealt with. It doesn't give us any other answers. And likewise, I think with films, music, all of that, that's depicting something, isn't it? That's depicting an impression of a way things could be, which could be true, which could have some validity to it, but it's never going to give all the answers, right? I talk to kids about the ecosystem of sexual and relational life, right? Where you're almost piecing a bit from everywhere. You know what the law kind of says, you know what you see in your peer group, you know what sort of different media depicts about things, you know what your parents put
Okay.
up in front of you. Where are
Okay.
you within all of that? Like, what are
Okay.
you taking from everything, and how are you moving around the bases? I do think film and music and art forms of any kind, when done to inspire a more nuanced and complex discussion, I think can actually be a really powerful depiction, actually. And I think kids can react quite well to that. You know, when people have put up like plays about things or that
Yeah.
sort of stuff, and then you can really break it down, right? I think
Yeah.
there holds a lot of promise in a positive sense.
Yes. And since I started all of this, I want to continue making films and animations and using photography to kind of make this to communicate this topic not in a lecture style, like that 15-year-olds or 17-year-olds will be so gripped to. I mean, we're all gripped to story, we're all gripped to film, we're all gripped to music. Like everyone is gripped to those things. And so if I can find out clever ways of capturing the imagination of young people whilst telling them a story and giving them another, portraying another image of sex to them, to add to their ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. Like, depicting it, you know, what I was saying before, like earlier, that idea that like kids do want to see something real. They don't want this abstract lecture that like
Right.
doesn't make sense. Actually portraying something, and portraying something different, right? Because we all have multiple selves, don't we? We have the self when we're alone, we have the self when we're like with a partner and feeling really freaked out or whatever, and then we've got the self when we're in a big peer group or whatever, and there's all this different stuff. And like, how can we sort of make sense of all of that, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
gain, it's about emotional intelligence, isn't it? Emotional literacy, all of that kind of thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And the
And I
more
just think,
diversity that's up there, I think the better.
yeah, and I think this is just hugely important. The longer I do this work, and the more I start understanding about offenders who are committing the crimes. Let's just take the adults that are committing the crimes of a sexual nature, and I start trying to understand their what's happened in their lives and what they've done in their lives to end up in that position. I feel like a good solid foundation as you are developing as a young person about sex and understanding the variety of ways it can be approached and how safe it can be and how connecting it can be and how you can really take care of each other in the process and also pleasure each other, because that's the goal, right?
Yeah.
And just to set like great foundations for that, instead of only being, let's just take a young boy, only being a young boy consuming like incredible amounts of porn, could be every day, and that algorithm and that homepage dragging you into different areas of porn and possibly fabricating your desire, and then watching films and watching very aggressive music lyrics and like nobody ever talking to you person on person about sex in any of its ways. I just feel like that's a bad foundation for sex. And I'm going to guess here that a lot of people that are like continually offending sexually, whether that be online or in person, just don't have good foundation. I know it's a lot more complicated than that, right? But I feel like one of the ingredients is the as generations, like even my generation, we never had a good foundation for the talk conversation around sex, and maybe it's still not a good foundation being taught at the moment, and I think it's causing a lot of problems.
Yeah, do you not know? And I'm totally inspired by everything that you say, because I really think you're getting it, like, well, who knows if you're getting it right, but like for me,
Yeah.
it so resonates with everything I'm trying to do, because it's about building the foundations for something. And we can kind of malign all these influences that are out there that are having a really powerful effect on people, or we could say, okay, but what would healthy, positive, strong
Right.
foundations look like, right? What are we trying to look at here? And absolutely, this idea of safety and pleasure and what it means to have pleasurable and fulfilling experiences whilst doing it safely, but also recognizing the space for like risk and transgression and pushing boundaries and what it looks like to do that in a safe space. and to really sort of engage with all those sort of complexities of desire and arousal and why people even have sex. I mean, what I think is so incredible to do with young people is even just start the conversation of like, why do people even have sex? Like, why do we even have relationships? Like,
Yeah,
why does any of this
brilliant.
matter? What's the
Brilliant.
point? Why are we all even here? And then from
Brilliant.
then going on and being like, okay, what are we trying to achieve,
Yeah.
right? And how do we sort of marry all that up, and to what extent do those reasons and motivations that we're bringing to the table, do they increase or decrease the likelihood that we might do something safe and fulfilling here for the other
Mm,
person?
mm.
If you're coming in as like a young lad worrying about what your mates think and all the rest of it, to what extent are you going to really be in a space to be able to
Mm.
talk with that girl?
Yeah.
And like, let's start unpicking it a little bit, right? So we can be a bit more self-aware
Mm.
and a
Yeah.
bit more empathetic to
Yes.
each other, right? Because
Yeah.
that's good sex or whatever. I mean, you need empathy, you need perspective taking, right?
Mm, mm.
Otherwise, it's not going to happen. So, it's a really important, quite skill to take, isn't it?
Yeah, it's incredible. Everything you're saying is incredible. Emily, I am wondering, um, would it ever be possible for me to come and sit in one of your discussions?
Yeah, that would be so cool. Oh my goodness, yes, that would
I
be
mean, I would
good.
love to do that. I'm happy to travel. Like, I just feel like I'd love to see the way that you're talking to these young people and just see how the conversation is unfolding.
Yeah.
If I could ever, if it would ever be a possibility, I would love, please,
Oh, that
um,
would be amazing. No,
to
absolutely my
to be
pleasure.
able
Yeah, let's do
to be able
it.
to do that. It's
Mhm.
been incredible to talk with you. Time has absolutely flown, and I'm pretty sure we have so much more to talk about. But I'm capping these at an hour just for the moment.
Yep.
And I'd love to just, as I mentioned, just stay connected, have more of these conversations, because one of the things that I want to do during my presentation, after I've taken the young people through my storytelling, I want to have so much to offer in the Q&A discussion, and I want to be so equipped with connecting with young people in a way that they relate to and leave a lasting
Mhm.
impression. So to learn from your work would be incredible.
Yeah, no, and likewise, yeah, it will be like it's been a great conversation, and yeah, like you say, could talk forever, couldn't we? And
Yeah,
yeah, no, I really want to hear more about what you do
yeah,
and see
fantastic.
how that all unfolds
Yeah,
100% because it sounds absolutely like what we need. So yeah, thank you so much for
thank you.
having me. Yes.
Brilliant, Emma. And just before we finish, um, do you have a website or to direct anybody to anything?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I have my sort of like main website that like links to everything that I do. So I don't
Yes,
know, do I just share that with you?
please.
Yeah, yeah.
Please just tell
So
us what it is, and I'll put the notes in the show notes as well.
oh, okay, cool. So best thing to do actually would just Google Surrey University and like my name, Emily Setty, and then you'll get to my page. I am on Twitter as well. So I post about everything that I'm up to there. It's just all my name is my
Yeah,
handle. Yeah.
brilliant. We'll put those notes in the show notes as well, so people can find your work.
Oh,
Emily, thank
thank
you so much.
you. No, it's been my pleasure. Honestly, love it. Yeah,
Thank
thank you
you.
for getting in touch. And yeah,
Thank you.
speak soon, I'm sure.